A round of applause, please, for Pastor Poju Oyamade. Our very first speaker is Mrs. Ndidi Nwuneli.
Ndidi Nwuneli is the managing partner of Sahel Consulting, which works across West Africa, unlocking the agriculture and nutrition potential in the region. Ndidi started her career as a management consultant with McKinsey & Company, working in their Chicago, New York, and Johannesburg offices. She holds an MBA from Harvard Business School and an undergraduate degree with honors from the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania.
Please, a warm round of applause as we welcome Mrs. Ndidi Nwuneli to the platform this morning. Let's celebrate her, please. Welcome. Thank you for coming.
Good morning. It's indeed a privilege and a pleasure to be here, and I thank Pastor Poju Oyamade and the entire Covenant Christian Center team for this honor. I'm going to be speaking on drivers, enablers, and obstacles to our growth with a focus on food and agriculture. Nigeria is naturally endowed for agricultural excellence. We have ample arable land. Only 40% is currently being cultivated, 12 million smallholder farmers, and we're the world's #1 producer of cassava, yam, and cowpea. Agriculture is also an important contributor to our economy. It's also an important contributor to our economy. It contributes 25.1% of our GDP, employs the highest number of Nigerians' workforce, and has limitless potential to create employment. And yet, we have a paradox. Recently, Recently, I was in a train station. I had just finished speaking at a great forum called the Eat Forum in Stockholm, Sweden. And I walked to the train station as I headed to the airport, and I was confronted with a big poster, life-size poster of an African child. This poster, which I personally took a picture of with my phone, listed 5 countries that were suffering from extreme hunger and malnutrition. And Nigeria was listed as the #1 country. And who else was on the list? South Sudan, Syria, and Eritrea. I was angry, as many of you can imagine. Nigerians want to be at the top of the list, but not around hunger and malnutrition. Now, the data reveals that that picture was not just an advertising gimmick. It's actually true. Nigeria is facing a hunger and malnutrition crisis. In fact, when you look into the data, you are shocked that 1 out of every 3 Nigerian children is stunted. Now, what does it mean to be stunted? When you're stunted, it affects not only your physical body, but your brain. And in the first 2 years of a child's life, if they don't get adequate nutrition, they cannot function to their highest potential. In parts of northern Nigeria, 1 out of every 2 children is stunted, and that is a crisis. Now, our nutrition challenges also affect women. We have high rates of anemia among women. And we're getting into something we also call overnutrition for a percentage of our population that's dealing with obesity. And this is leading to all sorts of other health challenges, such as heart disease, strokes, etc. Now, the truth is, when you look at it, many people don't realize that hunger kills more people than AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria combined. In fact, it's the leading cause of under 5 mortality in Nigeria. So this is a crisis. I don't have to tell people sitting in the room, I'm sure many of us know individuals who do 010, 001, 010, which is basically having 1 meal a day or 2 meals a day. And even when you do have a meal, in some parts of Nigeria, people boil rice with Maggi cubes, and that is their meal because they can't afford protein, a protein source. A mentor and a friend who I respect immensely, Dr. Akinwumi Adeshida, has a quote which says, "Economic progress is being undermined by hunger, malnutrition, and stunting, which costs at least 25 billion annually in sub-Saharan Africa and leaves a lasting legacy of loss, pain, and ruined potential. Stunted children today lead to stunted economies tomorrow." The truth is, when we complain about the state of affairs in our country, Nigeria, there's a direct link to malnutrition and hunger. Because if your children can't perform at their highest potential, if they can't live out their full God-given gifts because they have been constrained, then we can never have a country that we dream about. So how has this become our reality? Because many of you have heard stories about pyramids of food in Kanu and bread baskets all over the country. How can it be that a country as amazingly blessed as Nigeria should have a hunger crisis? There are a couple of reasons, and many of them, and most of them actually, are man-made. The first is that if you look at the 1980s and 1990s, there was tremendous underinvestment in agriculture and in food. In fact, we neglected this sector. And so it shouldn't surprise you that the average Nigerian farmer uses little or no fertilizer, does not use improved seed. In fact, most of the seeds the farmers used were developed in the 1970s. So they have not benefited from any of the innovations in seed quality and progress. We don't have feeder roads linking our farms to our cities or our processing zones. In fact, the colonialists built our country so that they could bring in large imports and export large shipments from Nigeria. So there's no link to say, can this country link processing sites to farmers? In fact, we've seen that only 25% of the total villages in Nigeria are accessible via tarred roads. Now, irrigation is also an issue. Many of you know that farmers only grow when it's raining, and we have rainy season 6 months out of the year in parts of Nigeria. In some parts of the Nigeria, we only have rain 3 months out of the year, which restricts the activities to that period. So a lot of these challenges are man-made. Now, this has resulted in uncompetitive value chains. Nigerian farmers cannot compete with farmers in any other part of the world, even for value chains where we feel like we're winners. I'll give an example. A Nigerian farmer will harvest 1.8 tons of maize. Their counterparts in another part of the world, Argentina or the United States, will generate 15 tons. So in terms of pricing, there's no way that a Nigerian farmer's maize is competitive relative to another part of the world. Even cassava, where I said we're the #1 producer, a Nigerian farmer will generate 12.5 tons per hectare, while in the global best practice, a Brazilian farmer will generate 25 tons. So our ability to be competitive is restricted by a lot of the challenges around how we grow food, what type of seeds we use, and the market-enabling environment. Even when this food is grown, 10 to 60% go to waste. Now, you might say, oh, it's only the tomatoes and the fruits and vegetables that go to waste. Sadly, the grains and tubers also go to waste because we don't have storage facilities. Our post-harvest handling is not suitable, and yet we use very archaic systems. Just imagine the baskets. How many of you remember those baskets being used when you were children? The baskets to store tomatoes, well, they're still being used in 2019. Now, baskets are the worst way to store any fruit or vegetable because if there's a rotten tomato in there, it definitely spreads to the entire. In other parts of the world, people use crates to store their fruits and vegetables. And yet in Nigeria, we have not moved beyond the baskets for tomatoes. As a result, we're a net importer of food. And it's no surprise to you that a large amount of our foreign exchange goes to help farmers in other parts of the world. We import wheat, fish, palm oil, soya beans, maize, Almost every single value chain where we're not competitive, we import. And that means that our farmers are losing, our people are losing while we're supporting other parts of the world. So it's no wonder when you go to supermarkets, just check out supermarkets and count how many made in Nigeria products you find on the shelf. The vast majority of the products on the shelf in our country are imported. And even those that are not imported are packaged, are basically imported, almost processed, and are repackaged in Nigeria. And this is a travesty. So when you add all of this up, you find that we're leading from behind when it comes to the amount of household income spent on food. The Nigerian households spend 56% of their income on food, the highest in the world. Indians spend about 30% of household income on food. Now, when we spend this much on food, it means we don't have money for healthcare. We don't have money to educate our children. We don't even have money to enjoy life because we're basically on a daily basis trying to make sure we can feed ourselves. In fact, the average Nigerian family buys food every day, at the end of every day, just so that they can have enough money to support themselves. In my own view, this is unacceptable, not for a country as blessed as we are. So what is holding us back? What are the obstacles? The first major obstacle is that we're not allocating significant resources to agriculture. When we looked at the 2018 budget, we have only allocated 2.2% of our budget to agriculture. Now, Nigeria committed to the Maputo Declaration, which suggests that we spend 10% of our budget on agriculture. Now, you'd say, well, there's not enough money, we're struggling to find funds anyway. But other countries have prioritized agriculture. When we look at Rwanda, Rwanda spends 9% of GDP on agriculture. Ethiopia, 12.2%. Even Ghana, our neighbor, spends 4.3%. So I believe Nigeria can do much better in these indices of spending and allocating money. The second is that there are a lot of agencies that are charged with different components, and this just shows you how complicated it is. Many of these agencies at the federal level, at the state level, and the local government level have competing mandates, and there's a lot of confusion about who should do what. If you use fertilizer as an example, from a regulatory agency, NAFDAC is supposed to regulate, SON is supposed to regulate, and then you also have about 4 or 5 agencies at the state and government level trying to distribute fertilizer, trying to ensure that our farmers can afford it, and that creates a lack of ownership. Who is ultimately responsible for ensuring that something happens? And this is a huge obstacle. The third is that there's limited infrastructure. Not only do we have poor feeder roads, we don't have cold storage facilities, and that means that if you produce anything, it can spoil because you can't transport it. In fact, many of our fast food chains in Nigeria fly their potato chips to each city every morning because there's no other way to transport it. And many of our dairy and ice cream companies cannot even supply the entire country just because of the challenge of cold storage. Irrigation, I've talked about. Power and energy remains a challenge. Most of our rural communities do not have access to power and energy, and so there's very little processing at the local level. And then trains for haulage, which other countries have leveraged. We don't have enough warehouses and silos, etc. And the fourth is that the policy environment is opaque. And there's an often flip-flopping of policies between administrations. And this has a limited impact on our society. A policy like rice and rice importation has different interpretations depending on who you're talking to and the amount of power you have and access you have to those in authority. Even financing, which has been a very important component that this government has tried to provide to our farmers through NISAL, through CBN's Anchor Borrower Scheme, through Bank of Industry, and a range of other initiatives. We're seeing that, unfortunately, many smallholder farmers have not benefited from all these different initiatives. Another key barrier, number 5, is limited adoption of innovation and technology. So most of our farmers and most of our agri-processors do not actually know the latest inventions and do not know how to actually leverage them. And there's a big reason why. there's one extension worker for every 8,000 farmers. That means that if you're a farmer, you might go for an entire year without learning anything new because that extension worker cannot find you or cannot get to you. In other parts of the world, the ratios are much, much lower. And in fact, the best practice is closer to 100 farmers to one extension worker, and we have 8,000 to one extension worker. Women and youth continue to face challenges when it comes to accessing food and engaging in this sector. Women cannot own land in many parts of Nigeria. Sadly, they cannot access financing and markets due to a range of discriminatory practices. And then our youth often find that agriculture is not attractive to them. And the average age of a Nigerian farmer is 55 years. And at 55 years, your ability to learn and grow and have the energy to use the archaic methods that we still use with your hoe and cutlass is limited. And then finally, there's significant climate change shocks that continue to affect us. Just last year, 5 states were covered with floods, which completely decimated farmlands. Now, climate change is real, and flooding is real, and we know that we have to prepare for it. We have droughts, we have floods, we have late rains, and even this herdsman crisis that we continue to face is linked to climate change because they have had to change where they graze because they don't have access to fodder. This, in turn, has really affected our farm families and really made it very, very difficult for people to be profitable in many parts of Nigeria. So there are lots of obstacles. And I'm sure many of you are wondering, how can we possibly address these obstacles? There are too many. Where do you start? I like this quote, and I'm inspired by this quote by Nelson Mandela, which says, like slavery and apartheid, he used poverty, but I've changed it to hunger. Hunger is man-made, and it can be overcome and eradicated by the actions of human beings. Sometimes it falls on a generation to be great. We can be the great generation. I believe that in my generation, in your generation, we can transform the future of agriculture and food in Nigeria. So what must we do? The first is that I think we have to set very bold targets over the next 4 years. And I've just picked 2 indices that I'll challenge all of you to work with me to address. The first is that we should reduce the population of stunted Nigerian children from 46% to 10%. The second is that we should reduce household expenditure spent on food from 56% to 30%. Now, what will this do for you and I? If we can reduce the number of stunted children, then we're going to make sure that we have a generation of young people who can achieve their highest potential, who can add value, who can use their brains and their talents to transform our land. If we reduce the household income and expenditure spent on food, we're transforming our own lives. If me and you spend less on food, then we can ensure that we have more money to educate our children. We can spend more money on our health care, and we can even enjoy ourselves. There will be discretionary income for entertainment. The truth is, everybody has a role to play. And I'm convinced that we all have a role to play, starting with our families, our communities, our states, our federal government, and the private sector. So let's start with families. What can each family do? Each family can start growing their own food. You know, in cities across the world, people are growing home gardens, even on their rooftops. You see this in Spain, you see this even in New York City. So in Lagos, right here, you can have a community garden, you can have a home garden. Every mother should become aware of what their children are eating and should check the nutritional status of everything, every particular item you purchase. Check where it's from, check what is in it, check whether that juice that you're drinking actually has any fruits, right? Or whether that's yam flour that you're using is actually yam flour, whether it's potato flour. Check whether the milk, the powdered milk you're buying actually has any dairy protein in it. The truth is that there's a lot of dumping in Nigeria because we haven't sorted out our food value chain. Thirdly, let's become and buy proudly Nigerian food. We've seen that transformation with our clothing. We're now very proud of Ankara and to support Nigerian designers. Please change your mindset. Imported food is not always better. In fact, the farther away food is from the source, the worse it is. Buy proudly Nigerian food. And let's make Nigerian food something that we can all be proud of globally. The way that you ask for Chinese food or Indian food when you go to a country, let people start asking for Nigerian food. Let's make jollof, Nigerian jollof, the winner. Huh? And let's make nkwobi equivalent to sushi. Why not? The second is that as communities, we have to come together to invest in community gardens, to invest in farmers markets, and we're seeing them pop up all over Lagos, and to invest in sharing our resources and our processing equipment. I know in Ekwe, there's a drying machine that all the cassava farmers work together to benefit from. If we actually pool our resources, we can invest in equipment that we can utilize to reduce the post-harvest losses that I earlier discussed. Now, for the private sector, there are ample opportunities. And when people think about agriculture, they should not just focus on farming. There are opportunities in insurance and financing. There are opportunities in technology. There are opportunities in processing, in inputs such as fertilizer and crop protection products, and retail aggregation across the board from farm to fork. There are opportunities for the private sector. We also need development partners to play a role in being enablers, in providing the funding, the research, the knowledge transfer, and the advocacy support required. In this country right now, there are very active development partners like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition, who are working very hard to address this. I feel that states have the most important role to play in the agricultural landscape. Every state in Nigeria has a competitive and comparative advantage around at least one value chain. It means that state governments have to take this seriously. They have to identify what value chain that is. They have to ensure that infrastructure is provided, access to farmers, access to markets, and that they do not serve as disenablers for those who are committed to unlocking the potential in this sector. Just imagine if Ondo takes cocoa as its serious income earner for the state and creates an enabling environment for every cocoa farmer, every cocoa processor in that state. Similarly, Ebonyi and rice can become synonymous with California and the wine country. It's not just enough to grow the rice. What can we do to process it and to ensure that we can support every actor in that value chain? Enugu and cashew, Kanu and tomatoes and cowpea. But it's not enough to just identify that value chain. On every state website, we should be able to click on the map of the state and click on every local government and find out where the farmers are in that local government so that we can support them with services. As private sector, we can source from them and we can enable them to live full and meaningful lives. And then on the federal level, the federal government has a lot of work to play, a role to play in creating an enabling environment. First, by increasing funding allocation, we need to go from 2.2% to higher rates. We need to reduce the duplication in our ministries and streamline them. We need to institute very cohesive policies. We need to invest in infrastructure. We need to invest in knowledge development and streamline all these research institutes. We have 23 research institutes in Nigeria focused on individual value chains. These research institutes should provide market and data-driven research that we can utilize. We need to create incentives for women and youth to enter the value chain, and we need to ensure that we prepare for climate change adaptation. Other countries have done it, and if they can do it, so can we. Brazil is one country that gives me a lot of inspiration. In the 1970s, we were shoulder and shoulder to Brazil. Today, they've left us behind. They set up Embrapa, which is a leading research institution. They hired the best people, they paid them well, and they empowered them. Just in 10 years, between 1996 and 2006, the total value of crops in Brazil rose by 365%. They quadrupled the beef and pork supply. The chicken supply increased by 22-fold. Today, Brazilian chicken is smuggled into Nigeria. You might not know that, but some of the chicken you eat at parties is from Brazil. Similarly, Ethiopia, a country that was synonymous with starvation, and some of you who are in my generation remember singing "We Are the World," to raise funds for starving children in Ethiopia. Today, Ethiopia is a beacon of hope in the agricultural landscape. They're investing in the sector, they have a long-range plan, they have the best commodity exchange in Africa, where their farmers are linked directly with international markets to sell their coffee. I mean, when you look at Ethiopia, you say, if Ethiopia can do it, what is holding Nigeria back? Absolutely nothing. It's political will and a commitment from all of us to do what is required. And then we need to engage youth in our sector. Youth are the future of this sector. And unless we change our curriculum in our universities to transit from agriculture as a science to agribusiness, unless we use technology, unless we show youth that they can make money in this sector, they will not come into it. And I think it's our responsibility to do that. So we all have a critical role to play. Families or communities, private sector organizations, development partners, state governments, and the federal government. I'm going to end with just my own personal story about how I got into this space. Because I grew up in Enugu on a university campus. My husband grew up in Unilag campus. And ordinarily, our paths were not linked to agriculture. None of us studied agriculture in school. And we were quite comfortable doing the things we were doing. But hearing these indices at a conference in 2007 in Oslo, I was shocked. I was invited to this Africa Green Revolution conference, and there were about 200 people at this conference. Most of them were not African. And as I heard these statistics about how much African farmers make, their poverty indices, the limited amount of irrigation, 1% of our land is irrigated, I mean, I was angry, and I was wondering, why are enough of us not engaged in this sector? What are we doing? And so my husband and I decided to work together to start a range of companies to address this. Has it been easy? Absolutely not. Is it a challenging sector? Yes, it is. But the ability to make a difference and transform lives is immense. And you'll be able to feed yourself and your family while doing it. Our alma mater even recognized the work that we did, profiling us very early in the Harvard Business Alumni Review. The first company we started is called Sahel Consulting. Sahel Consulting works across West Africa, unlocking the agriculture and nutrition potential of the region. I have a dynamic group of young people, many of them worked on this presentation, who did not study agriculture, but have bit the bug and are passionate about transforming the lives of our people and getting a good salary while at it. One of the projects that we're working on at Sahel, which we're very proud of, is called the Nigeria Dairy Development Program. This project directly addresses the challenge around dairy. Most of the milk that we consume in the formal markets in Nigeria is imported from farmers in the Netherlands, farmers in Denmark, farmers in other parts of the world and not Nigeria. And yet, Nigeria has the largest cattle herd in Africa. There's a disconnect between the smallholder farmers and our dairy sector. And so through this project, we're putting smallholder dairy households into clusters. We're providing them with training so that they can produce hygienic milk, feed and fodder so that they don't have to go around grazing. They actually can eat hay and silage that's cultivated in their neighborhood, which is a business opportunity for people. We're ensuring artificial insemination so that their cows can have higher yields, and we're creating a whole ecosystem. Every single day now, Friesland, Campina, and LNZ collects milk from these households. And it's improving their lives and improving the nutritional status of their children, but also making milk more affordable for all of us to consume. We're also working across seed systems, introducing innovative seeds to farmers in the cassava and yam value chain, working across Nigeria and Ghana to do this. Our sister company, Sahel Capital Agribusiness Managers, which my husband runs, is a private equity fund. And this company is investing in companies across Nigeria, giving them catalytic capital to grow and giving them a lot of support to transform their communities and the lives of people. This Sahel Capital manages the Fund for Financing Agriculture in Nigeria. And this fund has invested in a rice company in Anambra State, in a dairy company in Kano State. We've also invested in a palm oil company in Kwara, poultry in Kwara, and then most recently, we've also invested in a cassava company in Kogi. So you can see that it's a Nigeria-wide intervention. And there's so much potential when you unlock catalytic capital to improve the entrepreneurs who have committed to this value chain. Now, I mentioned the challenges around youth. Now, both Sahel Capital and Sahel Consulting realized that many of our young people who were studying agriculture in schools were not interested in it. In fact, it was their fourth choice. If you ask the average young person, if you ask them, why are you studying agriculture? I couldn't get medicine. After medicine, I couldn't get pharmacy. Even microbiology, I couldn't get. So I ended up in agriculture. That is a shame. And so what we decided to do 2 years ago was to start going to these universities to change the professors' mindset and the youth's mindset about the potential in this sector. We have a full-day conference, and then we bring some of them as interns to our office, and then we give them scholarships. We've started changing the mindsets of young people. So if you've studied agriculture, any agriculture-related subject, please be proud of your degree. Hold it up as the degree for today and tomorrow, because Nigeria needs you more than ever before. Now, this last company we started is called Ace Foods Processing and Distribution Limited. And we started this company to address the two issues I raised earlier, the high rates of post-harvest losses and the rampant malnutrition that we have in Nigeria. Ace Foods now has about 14 products. We sell them across Nigeria, and we're providing these products to improve the nutritional status of our people. I'm very, very proud of the Ace Foods team. Today, we're in 10 states in Nigeria, over 100 supermarkets. We have 80 full-time employees and many, many contract workers who have a warm meal and health insurance. We also ensure that the staff are mostly women, actually over 50% women, which is something that I'm very, very passionate about. In addition, we've been exporting to the United States and the Netherlands. I just want to round up by sharing through Ace Foods, we actually have a nutritious product called soya maize, fortified with vitamins and minerals. And this is a product, it's like a corn soya maize blend that the World Food Program uses all over the world, and the World Food Program imports into Nigeria, even though companies like Ace Foods produce it. Now, that's a policy issue, which I'm sure somebody else will take on. The challenge is, we decided to go to IDP camps and actually donate some of our products to the babies in those camps. And during one of the visits, I went to Durami IDP camp in Abuja. I met a baby, Fatima. This baby was 6 months old, but only weighed 4 kilos, half her birth weight size. Now, this baby could die if she just got a common cold, because her body was not strong enough to withstand even the basic issues that children face. And when we talked to her mother had carried her from one camp to the other, as is often the case. So we decided to give her our food products, and we saw a transformation in her lives. But this baby, Fatima, looks very similar to that baby that I saw in Stockholm, right? And it just came home to me that this crisis is a crisis that we must all own as Nigerians. When you think about it, and you think about the population trajectory of our nation, UNICEF just came out with the statistics that we're 201 million people. We're expected to get to 450 million by 2050. Lagos alone is supposed to be 50 million people. Now, if you live in Lagos like I do, you should be scared or excited about the business prospects that this opens up. Now, this keeps me up at night, and it should keep you up at night, because if we cannot feed 201 people, how will we feed 450 million? How will we feed them unless we jointly work together to address the agriculture and nutrition challenges in our country? So if you've not taken anything from my presentation, I know I had so many statistics, and some of you are wondering what she's talking about. Please take away these 3 points. That even though our country is naturally endowed to feed ourselves, we're facing an immense hunger and malnutrition challenge. And anybody that tells you that it's not true, please introduce them to me. I'll show them the statistics. Or just take them to any neighborhood in Lagos, because we have hidden hunger even in our own backyard. The second point is that most of the obstacles and barriers that are preventing us from achieving this are man-made. And because they are man-made, with the cohesive policies and a political will, we can address them. And thirdly, we all have a critical role to play. Everybody, from families, individuals, communities, the state, development partners, the government, everybody has an important role to play. We must leave a legacy for our children and grandchildren. When I think about the face of an African child, or a Nigerian child, I don't want to see a starving child. I don't want to see a starving child anywhere in the world. I don't want people to tell me they used to tell them to eat their dinner because they're starving children in Nigeria. This is the face of the Nigerian children we want to see. Vibrant, with bright eyes, a head full of hair. So I'll leave you with a quote which calls me to action every time I read it. It's by Kofi Annan, which says, "The eradication of hunger is not an end in itself. It's a first step towards sustainable development and progress in general. For a hungry man is not a free man. He cannot focus on anything else but securing his next meal." My brothers and sisters, we cannot move Nigeria forward unless we address the hunger and malnutrition challenges facing our land. Because every day we step out of our houses, we're meeting hungry men and women who will do anything to get that next meal. And living on a daily basis with that fear should propel you and I to stand up and do something to address the malnutrition and hunger challenges. I believe we can do it. Thank you very much. God bless you all.